To another Art of Gridding screen sharing, and in this episode what we're going to do is talk to Chris Paton, who's the MD of Quirk Solutions, and Chris's team have offered a great new free resources on the Grid store which helps facilitate the decision gaming process. So what we're going to do in this, I'd say we'll keep it to sort of a 10-15 minute chat, Chris, is talk about, well, firstly decision gaming.
Sure.
I'd love to hear a bit more about when you think decision gaming is a relevant methodology process. We'll then jump into the grids. If you could give an overview of the grid, that would be great. Talk about how the grid is best, applied. And then I think, interestingly, if we take a step back, it would be fascinating to hear from you how you feel other sort of SME consulting professional service businesses can use sort of a method grid to present their expertise and deliver their services. And I guess any advice you've got, having gone through this process of mapping some of your expertise as to what you learned on that journey, any top tips for others. But if that all makes sense, let's kick off, Chris. I'd love to hear a bit more about Quirk Solutions.
Yes, we've been around for 8 years now. Set up as I left the military. Been working with all sorts of different sectors and different scales of businesses. Essentially built around two key propositions in a management consultancy offering. The first is around the decision making, so making sure that you're positioning right, that you've got the right products in the right place at the right time, with the right people, and that you can actually deliver it, and challenging those through the decision games that we'll talk about this morning. But also then training up organisations and helping improve, if you like, the engine through their human behaviour, their human capital. So working with their teams to train them up on things like leadership, managing stress, decision-making, vulnerable leadership, and helping to improve accountability. So the two go hand in hand, really, the training to the people alongside the running the decision games.
No, that's great. And maybe if you could sort of step, before we actually get into the grids in more detail, Chris, just a little bit more about decision gaming in the round. When do you feel it? Firstly, what is it to the uninitiated, and when do you feel it's a useful sort of process to apply?
I mean, we can look at this within the grid. If you go into the elements on defining desired outcomes, essentially, decision gaming is all about putting a plan or a strategy or an initiative under a degree of pressure to work out where the gaps are, where the weaknesses are. And therefore, it helps you avoid preventable mistakes. It's fighting against that confirmation bias. We all like to look for factors and values that basically reinforce the decision we already want to make. And actually, the decision game helps to knock that to one side slightly and give it much more of a reality check, so we don't go blundering off into mistakes that cost us a lot of money. But there's lots of different uses for them. Some of them are listed here within this element. But we've seen them used around team building to help improve coherence within a team. We've seen them used for new product launches to make sure that product launch is absolutely bang on. We've seen them used for mergers and acquisitions, for consolidation and closing down sites. Seen them used an awful lot in change and transformation programs to help act as a communication platform to talk to people about what the change is going to be and get their challenge from it. So an awful lot of different ways in which they can be used, essentially just through changing who takes part in the actual game itself.
That's great. Now, I think plenty of relevant circumstances. Well, let's jump back up now, Chris, and hopefully people have understand sort of circumstantially when decision gaming may be relevant. Maybe you could just kind of give an overview as to how you've set up this particular grid.
Sure. So the first thing I suppose is that under the background stage, right at the start of the grid, there's an element there called how does this grid work, and within that there is a video which will describe how the grid is set up, how it functions, how you use it, what the different elements do, and what the different things do. So that's a useful resource if people want to have a look at it in a bit more depth. But essentially...
And Chris, sorry to cut across you there, just to say that's always a really nice device, actually, where there's a sort of an explanatory element, right at the start of a methodology, and that, and using a video is a great way then of, describing to the sort of first reader, how to, apply the methodology overall. So that's a really nice touch.
No, thank you. I hope it will be useful for people and give them a little bit more depth than what we'll skip across now. But in essence, the grid is set out in the stages that you would go through to run one end-to-end, the end-to-end process. So starting out with the scope, where we can look at things like within there defining desired outcomes. So if you go into the desired outcomes, they could be a range of different things here. So do you want a technical test of the plan? If it's a new product, maybe it's something that has regulatory issues that you want to look at. Maybe it's something that, from an engineering perspective, you want to get right, or in the financial world, etc. So maybe you want to look at the actual technical details of what's right and wrong within it. Maybe because it's a change and transformation plan, you want to socialize that change and transformation with a difficult group of stakeholders. Or you want to bring in some external objectivity because you think internally quite a lot and you use your internal groups quite a lot. So there's lots of different focuses that you could have around this, and it's important to set those defined outcomes right up front. And there's another video within there, explaining what some of those might be and how you might go about it. So once we've set out the scope as to what we're trying to achieve from this game, then you're into the design stage where you are looking at setting out things like, well, which stakeholders do we want to take part? So, there's an element there where we're talking about the different types of stakeholder who might be involved, both internally and externally to the organisation. I think that's quite a key area. If we look within that element, you've got not just your usual internal stakeholders you would expect, like finance and marketing, etc., operations, logistics, but you've also got wider external stakeholders that would be involved in some of these issues, like suppliers, like shareholders, like the regulator, for example, any sort of pressure groups or environmental groups that you might have to deal with. So it's important to consider all these different types of stakeholder and who's going to take part in the game when we're in the design stage. Once we've got that design down and we're happy with it, then we start to move into preparing. And this is all about making sure that everybody that comes along to the game has the right amount of information up front. You don't want people turning up wondering what this game is all about, what's the topic. So giving them some information in advance about what the game is, why we're doing it, and some context around the topic that we're going to be looking at as well is really important. Before you then move into the game itself and running the game, which obviously ideally you need to be doing with some external objectivity, some external facilitators if possible. And there's the purple tile in that particular stage, which talks about the things that you need to have, the critical success factors for a game. So there's a useful video in there that people can watch, which helps to get those points across. And then once you've run the game and you've recorded all of those outcomes and the outputs from the game, we're into the report writing phase, where you really need to start to think about the types of output that you'll be getting. Now, these are usually risks you hadn't previously identified. There'll be lots of actions that you need to take now to improve the plan. And there's a redacted report from a real client that we worked with hung within this tile, which people can look at and go into. And that will talk through the types of outcomes that people can expect. So these essentially, we generally present them as quite high level as an executive summary, first of all, before going into grouping them within sort of different themes and areas. So this was the launch for a new product, a new service, and a growth essentially in a strategy. So when we start to look at some of the results that are there, you can get things in there that's, about redefining the culture to enable higher tempo delivery. And they were talking about how their culture at the moment is a blocker to their strategic success. Getting better at delegated empowerment under their regional models. So they have a central high-level function, but then they have a set of regions as well. And how do they empower those to make this better decision-making, achieve higher tempo? And then they started to look at the services and the products that they were looking at. Some of their growth was based around M&A, so there was a degree of risk within that they actually don't buy the right firms, and therefore they don't achieve the growth they're looking for simply through not buying the right firms. So all sorts of different outputs, and people can explore this particular redacted report to get a better idea as to what might come out from that.
Yeah, and I guess there's going to be a whole range of outcomes that's aligned to the wide variety of circumstances in which you might apply a decision gaming exercise. Yes. But fundamentally, a structured report to conclude with sort of meaningful meaningful analysis and actions, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And the grid talks about essentially three broad populations of people. There's the facilitators who are going to actually run the session for you and guide the process from end to end. You've got the client project team, i.e. the people who own the issue, whatever it is, as you just said. This could be anything from change to product launch to closure to M&A, whatever it is. They're the team that champion it and say, this is our plan, this is our strategy, this is what we're going to do. And then you have the broader participants, which we've already looked at within the stakeholder area, which could be lots of internal and external people.
No, great. That's really that's very, very helpful, Chris. And just, anything about the particular colour legend you've applied to this grid?
So the purple elements are purely there as background information. So that's where the background video is, and the video around how to run a successful game. The red elements are absolutely mandatory within, if you want to do best practice for a decision game. The blue elements are more for information, and they are not mandatory but recommended. And then the amber and yellow ones are recommended at different levels of importance of the issue. So if you're dealing with a really high level, serious issue, which has high material consequences for your organization, you should be looking at doing essentially all of these different elements, regardless of the color. If you are dealing with something that's slightly lighter touch, then you can maybe get away with just doing the red elements. But to be honest, for a best practice perspective and for people to learn how to do this properly, my personal recommendation would be for people to do every single element, because that'll give you a really good outcome.
No, great. Chris, that's really helpful. And I think, if people want to obviously, get into the grid themselves, it's a free resource, that people can access within the, the grid store in their main account. Let's take a step back, if we may. And Can you sort of just talk now about the, more generally the process, you're relatively recent user of the platform, how you found, MetaGrid has helped you both, present your sort of expertise and also clearly to deliver to that sort of expert statement. And are there any sort of real world examples that can sort of bring that to life for others?
Yeah, I think it seemed to me to be very intuitive to use from the outset. It wasn't particularly difficult to pick up for me or for any of my team. So I think that in terms of usability, right from the get-go, very straightforward. I think it has helped us enormously as a business in codifying what we do and helping us explain what we do better to others. I think there's always a risk when you're passionate about what you do and when you believe in it so much and you love it so much and you see the benefits that it brings, you get hugely excited about it. And there's a bit of a risk that you just gabble on. Whereas the method grid helps to put some boundaries around that, the framework around that, so that you are able to explain much more clearly what it is you're doing and how you're going about it and the different stages. I think it helps potential clients see the end-to-end process in particular. They can get a feel for it, because that then also allows you to demonstrate the value that you're bringing. So when you turn around and say, and this product is going to cost X amount of money, they think, okay, yeah, I get that, because I can see all the detail that's involved within it. I think the other way in which the method grid piece has really helped us is in then cloning it and replicating it to use for different areas for different clients, almost as a project plan. We've been able to clone it very quickly, then just give it, rather than it just being a decision game methodology, we've been able to then call it a client name decision game. And that then allows us to track through this, because the grid that we built has checklists, and these red elements turn green if the checklists are completed within each element. So you can see your progress going through it. So as well as project management, as well as a sales tool, as well as us helping to clarify our language, I think those are all the elements. But what's been interesting as well is it's, as we've gone out and spoken to clients about this, and you're talking about the real world example, we're working with quite a large national train company. And we were explaining to them our process using Method Grid. And what became clear for them was that they wanted to use it in different applications. So they started to think, well, could we use this in a crisis management application? So if we were to have an incident on the railway and we needed to have a process, yes, we've got things in place, we've got all measures, but nothing that works quite as neatly as Method Grid. So we've actually found that alongside explaining what Method Grid does to help us, clients have started to pick it up and adapt it and use it in their own different ways and to their own purposes. And we've been helped to advise them on what those adaptabilities might be.
Oh, that's great to hear. And then, Chris, just finally, I guess, for somebody that's maybe just started out, has opened up an account, but is essentially in that really early stage of sort of mapping their own methodology, be it pre-existing or they're starting to sort of just get to grips with that sort of initial architecture, as it were, of their processes. Yeah. Any advice there? Any kind of learns on the route of you doing that exercise? Any top tips you can pass
on? I would say learn very quickly the element copying function, because if not, you start to build your grid out, and as you can see here, there's quite a number of elements within this grid. It's not particularly complex, it's not particularly in depth, but there are still a number of elements. And if you're building each and every element from scratch, it can start to feel quite quickly like, the task of Sisyphus. Whereas if you learn the element copying function, then very quickly you can build up some templated elements that contain similar types of content that you want to have in there: video content, checklists, bullet points, text, web links, documents, whatever it is. If you can start to then just plug and play those elsewhere into your grid, you build the grid much quicker, because you can then go into those elements and just do edits rather than having to build it from scratch every single time. I think that's probably the most useful function that I found, as well as I mentioned earlier on, cloning the whole grid and giving it then a different client name so I can use it as a project tool, a project management tool, rather than just a sales describing what we do tool.
Chris, there's some great tips there, and what we'll do as a result of that prompt is in this, in the copy of this sort of blog post, we'll put the FAQ to those various aspects, and I think you're very right to emphasise them. For me, spending a bit of time getting the element format right for a particular methodology or grid is always time well spent. And then once you've got that format broadly, established, then it's always worth either creating a template in the template library that you can then use to create every single other template element, or indeed just copy the the pre-existing sort of elements over. So yeah, we'll put the FAQ in that talks to those features, and I think that's a great steer. Chris, that's really very helpful. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, finally, just if people want to find out a bit more about Quirk Solutions, potentially they have a decision gaming piece that is, of that real complexity. How do people find you?
If they go to our website, which is quirksolutions.co.uk, then there's a contact email address within the website. They can explore the website. It'll tell them a little bit more. There's videos within there as well. But also you can just go to contact us. That'll come through. And if people want to just ask advice or thoughts, I've got this particular type of problem or this particular type of issue. How do you suggest we go about it? What type of game might we use? Then we can very happy to provide that sort of advice. No problem at all.
Chris, that's really helpful. Thanks very much for your time. And if people want to go and see the grid that Chris's team have authored, Decision Gaming, you'll find it in the grid store. Thanks very much, Chris.
No problem at all, Dom. Thanks very much indeed.
Bye-bye.